Before credit cards, convenience stores, and two-day delivery, there was the kitchen table, the altar of survival. Our grandparents didn't cook for aesthetics or applause. They cooked because they had to, because every scrap mattered. Every meal was a small miracle made from whatever the day had left to give. So pull up a chair, grab your tin plate, and let's remember 25 humble meals that got our grandparents through the hardest of times. Meals made from grit, love, and the unshakable belief that tomorrow would taste just a little better. 1. Potato soup. It started with what they had. And often, that wasn't much. A few potatoes from the cellar, a pinch of salt, and water from the well. Some peeled them, others didn't bother. The skins made it heartier, and nothing went to waste. The potatoes boiled down into a creamy broth that filled the house with steam. If there was milk, even a splash, it made the soup rich. If not, no one complained. Sometimes an onion joined in, maybe a spoonful of bacon grease for flavor. Families gathered around chipped bowls, tired from work but thankful for something warm. It wasn't fancy, but it filled bellies and quieted worry. Potato soup didn't need to impress anyone. It just needed to feed them. And in that simple act, it gave them something rare in hard times: comfort, dignity, and the feeling that things might be okay. 2. Cornmeal mush. Cornmeal and water. That's all it took to keep a family going. It thickened in the pot as it cooked, plain but hearty, the kind of meal that stuck to your ribs. When there was syrup or molasses, it felt like a feast. When there wasn't, you ate it plain and gave thanks. If any was left, it went into the pan the next morning, fried in bacon grease until golden and crisp. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and nutty. Kids loved it. Adults needed it. Cornmeal mush wasn't glamour, it was grit, the kind that built railroads, washed laundry, and carried families through the hardest years. It was survival food with soul, turning nothing into something, and doing it day after day. 3. Dandelion greens. When the shelves were bare, the field still gave. Grandmothers with steady hands gathered dandelion greens from fence lines and fields, turning what others saw as weeds into dinner. The leaves were washed, boiled once to tame the bitterness, then fried with lard or bacon fat in an old cast-iron skillet. The flavor was earthy and sharp, seasoned with salt and vinegar if fortune allowed. Kids frowned at first, but hunger taught quick lessons. Before long, they learned to love what nature provided. Dandelion greens weren't just food. They were faith in a frying pan. They proved that even when the world offered little, the land still gave enough. And those who knew how to listen, how to work, how to endure, never went hungry. 4. Depression-era bread. Bread was life. It wasn't something you bought, it was something you built. Flour, water, a pinch of salt, and the miracle of yeast. That was all it took to keep hope alive. Some families kept a starter, a living mixture bubbling on the counter that they fed and protected like a family member. When there wasn't yeast, they made it from potatoes or old dough scraps. Every loaf was a risk because ingredients were too precious to waste. Sometimes it rose beautifully, sometimes it didn't. But either way, it filled the house with warmth. When butter ran out, you ate it plain. If someone had jam, it was passed down the table like gold. Crusts were saved for soups. Crumbs thickened gravy. Nothing ever hit the trash. Bread was more than food. It was comfort. It reminded people that even in a world that seemed to be falling apart, something could still rise in the oven. Kids would watch through the glass door as the dough swelled and browned, and for a few moments, the fear and noise of the outside world disappeared. That smell, warm, yeasty, familiar, it was the smell of survival. A loaf of bread didn't just fill bellies, it restored faith. 5. Onion sandwiches. It sounds almost like a joke today. Just slices of raw onion between two pieces of white bread, slicked with mayonnaise or lard. But back then, it was lunch. Cheap, fast, and enough to keep you moving till supper. The onions came from the garden or the cellar, strong and sharp enough to sting the eyes when you cut them. You stacked the slices on soft bread, added a smear of fat for flavor, and pressed it all together. The first bite hit like a slap, raw, bitter, unapologetic, but it filled a stomach for a penny. Children hated it at first. They'd wrinkle their noses, eyes watering, but after a few hard weeks, they learned to chew through the burn. Hunger teaches appreciation. Adults swore by it. Factory workers, field hands, and fathers with calloused palms carried onion sandwiches in wax paper, eating them at noon with a tin cup of water or coffee gone cold. The smell clung to their hands and clothes, but no one cared. It was honest food, harsh, yes, but honest. A poor man's lunch with the taste of sweat and survival baked right in. 6. Navy bean soup. If there was one dish that united every kitchen during the lean years, it was navy bean soup. The beans were cheap, they kept forever, and a single bag could feed a family for days. Every pot started the same way. Dried beans soaked overnight in cold water and hope. In the morning, they'd be poured into a big pot, joined by onions, maybe a carrot, and a bone if you were lucky enough to have one. Ham bones were gold. Even one would perfume the soup for hours as it simmered slow and steady. When meat wasn't available, salt and patience did the job. The beans softened, the broth thickened, and the smell filled the house like comfort. Served with cornbread or a slice of yesterday's bread, it didn't matter how simple it looked. It felt like a meal. Each bowl was warm, hearty, and humble. The kind of food that asked for nothing and gave everything. Families sat around their tables with chipped bowls, steam fogging their faces, eating quietly but gratefully. Navy bean soup wasn't just food. It was history in a pot, passed from soldiers to farmers, to mothers trying to stretch one more day out of what little they had. 7. Fried potatoes and onions. A cast iron skillet could save a family. Throw in a spoonful of lard and yesterday's potatoes sliced thin, and you had a meal worth coming home for. The potatoes hissed the moment they hit the hot pan, curling and browning at the edges. Then came the onions, sliced rough and dropped in to caramelize until they turned golden and sweet. The sound of the sizzle filled the kitchen. The smell drifted through the house, waking even the tiredest souls. There were no rules. You ate it whenever you needed to. Breakfast, lunch, or supper, it didn't matter. Maybe there was a fried egg on top if the chickens had been generous. Maybe there wasn't. But that combination of crisp potatoes, soft onions, and smoky fat was enough to make people forget their troubles, at least for a while. It was cheap, filling, and satisfying, proof that hunger could breed creativity. Even now, if you close your eyes and smell fried potatoes and onions, you can almost hear the laughter of a family making the best of what they had. 8. Rice pudding. Sweetness was rare back then, which made rice pudding feel like a treasure. It started with leftovers, cold rice from last night's supper, a splash of milk, a spoon of sugar if there was any left, and maybe a pinch of cinnamon or nutmeg scavenged from the back of the cupboard. Everything went into one pot, stirred until the kitchen filled with that slow, comforting smell of milk thickening and sugar caramelizing. The pudding baked until golden on top and creamy underneath. Children hovered close to the stove, waiting for the moment the spoon scraped the sides of the pan. When the bowls were filled, they ate in silence, spooning up the warmth, licking what was left behind. Parents didn't say much, but you could see it on their faces, that this was more than dessert. It was a small mercy in a time when sweetness was hard to come by. Even when the cupboards were almost empty, Someone always seemed to find enough to make rice pudding, because no matter how difficult things got, there was something sacred about ending a hard day with something that tasted like love. 9. Lard biscuits. The smell of biscuits baking was enough to make even the roughest morning feel like hope. Flour, salt, baking powder, and lard. That was it. 4 ingredients that stood between hunger and comfort. Lard came from bacon drippings saved in a tin on the counter, the kind you use sparingly because every spoonful counted. The dough was mixed by hand, patted out on a floured board, and cut into rounds with a cup or jar rim. When they hit the oven, the smell took over the house, smoky, buttery, honest. You didn't wait long before everyone gathered at the table. Some topped them with molasses, others poured gravy over the top, but most just split them open and ate them plain, steam rising from the soft center. They weren't fancy, but they were faithful, showing up on every table, no matter how bad the night before had been. Biscuits didn't just rise in the oven, they lifted spirits too. In kitchens where love had to make up for what money couldn't buy, biscuits were proof that something small, made by hand, could still taste like grace. 10. Cabbage stew. Cabbage didn't get much respect, but it kept people alive. Cheap, filling, and easy to grow, it was the backbone of many meals. When times were hardest, a single head of cabbage could stretch for days. You'd chop it up, toss it in a pot of water with maybe a potato or two, and let it simmer. If there was a little meat, a scrap of pork, a sausage end, or a leftover bone, it went in too, just to give the broth a bit of depth. The smell filled the house, earthy, sour, rich in its own simple way. Steam fogged the windows while the family sat waiting, spoons ready, grateful for anything warm. The broth was thin, but it carried meaning, patience, humility, and endurance. There wasn't enough for seconds, but there was enough to remind you that life still went on. Cabbage stew didn't make anyone rich, but it got them through another day. And when people look back now, they don't remember the taste of poverty. They remember the comfort, the laughter, the feeling that even in the toughest times, a shared pot could still bring everyone home. 11. Cornbread and milk. Day-old cornbread was never wasted. When it went stale, it became something new, crumbled into a bowl and drenched in cold milk straight from the icebox, or, more often, the well. There wasn't much to it, but it filled a man's stomach after a long day in the fields. In the humid heat of a southern summer, it was breakfast. When the cold crept in through cracked walls, it was supper. The milk softened the bread into something almost like pudding, simple and satisfying. There were no side dishes, no ceremony, just a quiet meal that said, "We make do, and we make it good." 12. Boiled cabbage and potatoes. When paychecks shrank or disappeared, cabbage was a gift from the garden that never let a family down. Boiled in a big pot with potatoes until both were soft and tender, it became dinner more times than anyone could count. The smell was strong but comforting, proof that something warm was coming to the table. Salt was added when available, and on lucky days, a small knob of butter would melt over the top, turning plain vegetables into something almost rich. It was cheap, forgiving, and it lasted. To some, it looked meager. To those who lived it, it tasted like perseverance, the flavor of people who refused to quit. 13. Johnny cakes. Johnny cakes were the pancakes of hard times, nothing more than cornmeal, salt, and water mixed into a thin batter and fried on a hot griddle until golden brown. They were crisp at the edges, soft in the middle, and hearty enough to keep a family moving. If there was syrup or molasses, that was a blessing. If not, they were eaten plain, often with a glass of cold buttermilk to wash them down. They weren't fancy, but they were a point of pride. A good Johnny cake proved you didn't need plenty to feel full. just a little cornmeal, a hot pan, and the will to keep going. 14. Tomato gravy over rice. Born from empty cupboards and stubborn creativity, tomato gravy was a Southern classic of survival. Cook stewed tomatoes with a bit of flour and fat, stirring until the mixture thickened into a rich, tangy sauce. It was then poured steaming over rice, biscuits, or whatever starch was available. The result was humble but deeply comforting, red as resilience itself. Each bite carried the flavor of thrift and invention, the kind that turned scarcity into satisfaction. Even when the pantry was nearly bare, tomato gravy proved that a little ingenuity could still feed a family well. 15. Grits. Grits were the great equalizer, served in big cities and country shacks alike. Coarse ground corn was boiled slow and stirred steady, transforming water and grain into something warm and steadying. A pinch of salt made it right. A pat of butter made it perfect. Some topped it with vegetables from the garden, others with a fried egg or a drizzle of syrup. It didn't matter how it was served. What mattered was that it filled empty stomachs and softened the edges of hunger. Sometimes enough really was all you needed, and grits were living proof of that. 16. Bologna and egg sandwich. After the war, when rations shaped the way people ate, the bologna and egg sandwich became a favorite. Cheap, quick, and satisfying, it was the kind of meal that felt like a small reward at the end of a long day. A slice of bologna hit the hot pan, curling up at the edges until crispy, then a scrambled egg was added on top. Folded between slices of soft white bread, it wasn't steak, but it tasted better than it had any right to. There was something oddly celebratory about it, as if breakfast had decided to fight back against hard times. 17. Chicken neck soup. Back then, nothing went to waste, not even the parts others threw away. Chicken necks, bony and overlooked, became the heart of a pot of soup that could feed a family. They were boiled slow with onions, carrots, and salt until the broth turned golden and rich. The meat, though little, fell away in tender shreds that floated through the soup like proof of effort. A few vegetables made it hearty, and a slice of bread stretched it further. It wasn't luxury, but it was love in liquid form, turning scraps into sustenance, bones into blessings. 18. Fried cornmeal mush. Yesterday's cornmeal mush never went to waste. Once it cooled and set, it was sliced into thick slabs and fried in hot grease until the outside turned golden and crisp. The inside stayed soft, almost creamy, and it could be eaten with syrup for breakfast or smothered in gravy for supper. The smell of it cooking, rich and nutty, was enough to draw everyone to the table. It was comfort for the weary and proof that yesterday's leftovers could make tomorrow brighter. In hard times, even scraps had a second life. 19. Shepherd's pie, the poor man's version. This wasn't the shepherd's pie of cookbooks and dinner parties. This was survival layered in a dish. Mashed potatoes spread over whatever leftovers were on hand. A few spoonfuls of meat, peas, carrots, onions, maybe some gravy if you had it. Baked until bubbling and golden, it came out of the oven smelling like home. It wasn't about luxury, it was about love. Using what you had to make something worth sitting down for. Every scoop carried the same message: waste nothing, want less, and be grateful for what's here. 20. Milk toast. Warm milk poured over toasted bread. That's all milk toast was, but for many, it was medicine. When someone was sick, tired, or worn down by worry, it was the meal that healed quietly. The bread softened in the milk, sweetened with a little sugar or honey if fortune allowed, and it went down easy. It was the kind of food that didn't shout for attention. It whispered comfort. You didn't eat milk toast to celebrate. You ate it to remind yourself that gentleness still existed in the world. 21. Vinegar pie necessity made people creative, and vinegar pie was one of the best examples. When lemons were too expensive and sugar too rare, grandmothers turned to vinegar, using its tang to mimic lemon flavor. The filling was a simple mix of eggs, flour, sugar, vinegar, and water, baked until smooth and golden. The result was tart, sweet, and surprisingly elegant for something born of scarcity. One bite tasted like triumph over limitation, a reminder that even in hard times, a good cook could turn almost nothing into something worth remembering. 22. Spam and potatoes. Spam and potatoes became a wartime staple that never really left Southern tables. Canned meat was cheap and easy to store, and when fried until crisp and served with sliced potatoes, it became comfort disguised as convenience. The smell of it cooking, salty and smoky, could fill a house and make it feel like a feast. It wasn't fancy, but it was familiar. For families who'd lived through ration books and uncertainty, this simple meal was proof that they could make anything work if they had a skillet and some heart. 23. Apples and oats. Apples and oats made the kind of meal that warmed from the inside out. Apples were peeled and stewed down until soft, mixed with oats and just enough sugar to make it feel like dessert. If there was cinnamon in the house, a pinch went in for good measure. It was hearty, hot, and cheap enough to feed a family without guilt. In lean times, sweetness was a rare gift, and apples, dependable and generous, were the fruit that never stopped giving. 24. Bread pudding. Bread pudding was proof that yesterday's bread could still have a purpose. The old loaves were torn into pieces, soaked in milk and beaten eggs, sweetened with sugar, and baked until golden and fragrant. The smell of cinnamon and vanilla filled the house long before it came out of the oven. When it did, it was rich, warm, and comforting, the kind of dessert that made everyone forget how little they had. Bread pudding wasn't just about making do, it was about making something beautiful out of what was left. 25. Canned tuna casserole. After the war, when pantries filled with canned goods and creativity came back to life, the tuna casserole was born. Canned tuna, egg noodles, and cream of mushroom soup came together in one pot and baked until bubbly and brown. It was cheap, easy, and endlessly adaptable, a working family's answer to comfort food. For many, it became the taste of recovery, proof that even after years of hardship, people hadn't lost the knack for turning necessity into nourishment. It wasn't just dinner. It was a sign that better days were finally on the way. These weren't gourmet meals. They were testaments to survival, to faith, to the stubborn will of ordinary people who refused to give up. Every pot of soup, every loaf of bread, every pan of fried mush told the same quiet story, that love could be measured not in luxury, but in leftovers, that even in scarcity, there was abundance, of creativity, of care, of community. Our grandparents didn't just cook to feed their families. They cooked to remind themselves that life, even when lean, could still be rich in meaning. Because food isn't just about what's on the plate, it's about who's around the table. And no matter how small the meal, when it's shared with gratitude, it's a feast.